Whenever anybody dared to ask their opinions on the subject, both Michael O'Donoghue and John Belushi were keen to make it clear that they loathed television. O'Donoghue once referred to it as a lava lamp with sound, and Belushi claimed to have a TV, but that it was tough to see it through all the spit on the screen. This was, in a certain sense, a carefully cultivated air of coolness which distanced them as artistes from the deeply unhip things that the old guard of television had come to represent. Never mind the fact that they themselves worked in the medium of TV. They were there to tear it apart from the inside, not to participate in the hack commercialism of sitcoms and game shows. All good and well then, but both men also had an abiding respect for at least some of the old TV standard bearers from the youth, especially those who were able to bend the system to their will. Belushi was an avowed fan, for instance, of Milton Berle, and when Berle hosted some years later, Belushi was perhaps the only one blind to Berle's disastrously dated material and poor behavior. Even the most anti-TV among the cast and writers clearly had some love for the old idiot box, tinged with distaste as it might have been. It's perhaps there that we found our explanation for this week's choice of host. Nobody can discount how important Desi Arnaz, along with his wife Lucille Ball, had been to the very existence of television as a medium, and I think Lorne and the rest of the cast recognized that. Even more than that, they did it their own way. Arnaz and Ball's interracial marriage and partnership hadn't been looked at as entirely respectable, but their popularity had led them to become an institution regardless of the disapproval of the network. By having him as a host, they sent a signal to folks in the audience who might have discounted SNL as only for young folks and hippies. This is where show business is headed. We are the future of variety TV. Arnaz represents a bit of a passing of the torch then, I guess. That's how I see him fitting into this first season. And what I think the show gained from having him on was a little bit of continuity with variety shows of the past, along with a sort of validation that NBC's Saturday Night had the legs to become an institution, if not an entirely respectable one. They'd do it their own way. Listen, I'd like to think I don't need to spend too much time telling you who Desi Arnaz was. However, I realize that kids these days don't grow up with reruns of old sitcoms the way I did, and I suppose it's possible there are folks with an interest in SNL who don't know about I Love Lucy. So here's the super short version. After work on Broadway and in movies, Arnaz got his start in American broadcasting as a bandleader with Bob Hope's Pepsodent show, before being given his own musical game show on CBS. Around that time, CBS also approached his wife Lucille Ball about adopting Ball's radio program for television, which she agreed to do on the condition that Desi be allowed to play her husband on the show. The rest is, as they say, history. The studio they founded to produce I Love Lucy, Desilu, went on to pioneer the multi-camera format which would dominate comedic TV production for nearly half a century, as well as the practice of filming such programs rather than broadcasting them live, which allowed for delayed airings and reruns. By the time of his 1976 appearance on SNL, however, all of this was very much in the past. Arnaz and Ball had divorced in 1960, and he greatly scaled back his performances from that point, preferring to work behind the scenes on Desilu projects as a producer. Officially, he hosted NBC's Saturday Night to promote his recent autobiography, a book by Desi Arnaz, but I happen to think he was honored to be considered and willingly took the opportunity to jump back on stage. Sure, there were a few moments when the old fella got a little testy with them. He's rumored to have gotten impatient during a blocking session, shouting in his famous accent that he invented this stuff, which, fair enough. But he genuinely seems to enjoy having one less go in the spotlight, and I actually found a lot to enjoy in this episode. This is another one of those situations, obviously, where the host pulls double duty as the musical act, this time with the added twist that his somewhat less charismatic son is along for the ride. Desi Jr. was the second child of Arnaz and Ball and was famous before he was even born as Little Ricky, the TV couple's kid. I find it kind of heartwarming then that he's here performing with his pop on TV one last time. From my brief research, Desi Sr. did a few other shows as publicity for his book in '76, and only made occasional variety or game show appearances after hosting SNL. I could be missing other later performances, but I don't think so. Regardless of whether it was the last time, they both seem to be having a great deal of fun with the two songs they perform here. They begin with a number from Desi Sr.'s big band days, Cuban Pete, and let me tell you, I had a grin ear to ear the whole time. Lorraine starts the song with a really gutsy introduction of Arnaz, and she really sells it. It was obviously quite low in her vocal range, but she did a great job projecting over the band. Desi only has about an octave of range himself at this point in his career, but he uses it charmingly. The two Desis close the evening with Senior's signature number, a Babaloo, which starts a little shaky. The mix is off and Arnaz has trouble hearing himself. By the time the song starts properly, though, he's back on track and performs with gusto. So much gusto, in fact, that Lorne had one of his first paranoid and panicky thoughts about the live nature of the broadcast during the number. In Live from New York, he says, "The great moment when he was doing Babalu live on the air with Desi Jr., I was in the control room watching and we were trying to figure out when to cut away. He throws himself into it so much, I'm like seeing his lips turn blue. He's going into it totally like he's 30, and I'm thinking, oh my god, he's gonna have a coronary. What happens if he dies on live TV? And so we finally cut away to commercial. They did in fact cut away to commercial, and we'll talk more about what happened when they came back from that break in the outro. The phone gag this week is another blowjob joke.
I'll be right with you, honey. It's not what tune you hum. It's just how you hum.
I'm Chevy Chase, and you're merely a statistic. Yup. Cocaine. It's cocaine time. This isn't a particularly busy news week. They worked a Franco joke in and had George Wallace picking a running mate from his nose. They stay with the running gag about Muhammad Ali picking very easy opponents so he can hold on to his title. This week he's announcing his bout with Helen Hayes, who is in her 70s at this point. In the definitely an O'Donoghue joke of the week, we have a koala bear who committed suicide over his despondency at the death of Francisco Franco. We have a gag about the upcoming transition to unleaded gasoline.
Despite oil company objections, the California Air Resources Board Thursday approved a program that would virtually eliminate harmful additives from motor fuel over the next 4 years. Their catchy slogan, "Get the lead out of your gas."
Chevy almost got booed for a Nixon Chinese "I am not a clook" joke. Good for you, audience. And finally, the remote from the Hearst trial is again presented by nose-holding Chevy, this time over stock footage from ancient Betty Boop follies. Gary Weiss is not Albert Brooks. What I mean by that is he is not comfortable or charming on camera at all, and I think he'd do well to just let his films speak for him. Here, he introduces his film on Taylor Mead, who was an actor in Warhol films and a fixture of the New York scene, and Taylor's cat. You may have noticed the massive verbal quotation marks I placed around the word actor in that last sentence, as Mead is perhaps best known for the Warhol piece Taylor Mead's Ass, which is literally just 76 minutes of Mead's backside that Warhol shot as a rebuttal, to a scathing review in the Village Voice of some of his earlier films. I can't speak for the Warhol flick or Mead's butt, but this Wise piece is precious and makes me want to learn more about Mead as a person. The film is basically him getting his cat stoned on catnip and extemporizing, and it went over surprisingly well with the audience to be so off-topic from the host. This is my favorite of Wise's films so far, but that's mostly down to Mead and his catatonic feline friend being so adorable to me. I bet they had some stories to tell. Your mileage may vary, though, as far as this one is concerned.
Come in.
The Ford in Therapy cold open is pretty strong. Danny acts as the therapist and does word association with the president, who of course is entirely too stupid to be helped by it in any way. Ford associates most words he's offered with falling down in various fashions. There are some pretty fun gags in the word association, considering these Ford sketches are generally about the physical buffoonery.
Head.
Bump.
Snow.
Slip.
Primary.
Lose.
Lots of folks on the cast later professed to not liking to work with Chevy, but Aykroyd is a notable exception. They worked together frequently even after they left SNL and spoke highly of each other. You can see that respect when they're on stage together. Chevy literally breaks a wall, as well as the metaphorical fourth wall, to end the sketch.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
Nice touch, even if it's not quite as brutal as some of his earlier falls. Perhaps last week's tumble off the railing hurt more than he let on. Reuben Carter carries National Express is a hell of a broadside.
Look, Harry Belafonte may not need identification, but you and I do. Don't go any place without it. I know I don't.
Is quite a way to address how white-looking black dudes are often treated better by the police than darker-skinned fellows, I'd say. This is one of the better Garrett showpieces so far, but I wish they gave him more decent material that wasn't directly related to race. I know I'm probably asking a lot for a show from the 70s. We open on Jane and Chevy in bed on a darkened stage. Chevy is apologizing for an embarrassing bout of impotence on his birthday. It's all played very straight. Jane says that it was just bad timing on his part and she wasn't in the mood, that she had something different in mind, like having friends over maybe. At which point the lights come up and the friends jump out yelling, "Surprise!" The long, cringy setup really builds to the punchline here, and I like this one. Lorraine plays Luciana Vermicelli, an entirely on-the-nose spoof of Donatella Versace. She's portrayed as a vampire who drinks the blood of the young to maintain her youth, see? That's the joke. I'm only aware of Donatella as the plastic surgery robot she later became, so this isn't exactly funny to me. I never assumed she was human in the first place. They are harsh, though. No punches are pulled, and I can only imagine this sort of thing annoyed Versace if she was aware of it. Danny presents Literary Recital, in which Lewis Carroll's poem Jabberwocky is read by Sir Desmond Arnaz. Haberwocky, as he pronounces it, is then thoroughly and completely annihilated by Arnaz's heavy accent.
It was brilliant, and the slitty toves did gyre and gimble in the wavy.
Arnaz isn't impressed with Carroll's gibberish English. Kidding aside, they must have had some trouble coming up with material that would work for Arnaz, but he was obviously okay with poking fun of his distinctive manner of speaking on I Love Lucy, so this was low-hanging fruit. Haberwocky is a perfectly enjoyable gag then, but it's a bit one-note.
Who the hell talks like this?
Here we have a musical performance by Very White, played by Chevy as a, you guessed it, very white version of Barry. It's not very sexy, but it's a pretty dead-on impersonation of the structure of every Barry White song. Lots of talking over a vamping funk phrase, which occasionally explodes into a crescendo where he almost, but not quite, breaks out into crooning, then returns to talking. It goes on for what seems like ever and ever, just like a Barry White song. So well done there, I guess. I can't really imagine them taking the time to do such a long and drawn-out parody of any working musician these days, so they really must have been cheesed off by White's success to have gone after him like this. It's effective, but not exactly side-splitting today. Desi introduces early pilot episodes of I Love Lucy before they'd gotten the formula right. They have Desi Jr. playing Desi and Gilda as Lucy. The various failed concepts included I Saw Lucy, I Loathe Lucy, in which Ricky is horribly and unfunnily abusive, I Love Louie, in which Lucy is replaced by Garrett as Louis Armstrong, and I Love Asparagus? The sketch illustrates what I meant earlier when I said they had trouble coming up with material for Desi. This is not exactly a groundbreaking concept, but what the hell else were they going to do with this guy? For what it's worth, Desi Jr. plays his dad pretty well in the flashback sequences, but the accent is sorely lacking. Tom Schiller comes out also playing Desi for the final iteration, and even though he's cartoonish about it, he does a better job of Desi Sr.'s distinctive manner of speaking. Desi Jr. has an awkward monologue wherein he introduces his dad in The Untouchables. This is a strange one in that I sort of get the connection to Desi, but I don't really understand the way they implemented it. See, Arnaz and Desilu Productions had been instrumental in the making of the early 60s crime drama of the same name, which focused on the exploits of Prohibition-era crime fighter Elliot Ness. Fine then, that makes sense. Arnaz never appeared on the show though, so I just don't quite understand why the writers came up with this as a vehicle for him. In any event, Arnaz seems to relish playing a mobster baddie, but the sketch doesn't go much anywhere. And Dan Aykroyd does a really good Robert Stack as Elliot Ness impression though. Danny's really entertaining pretty much any time he's on screen, and I look forward to him getting more focus after Chevy leaves. Gilda's good here as Lucy as well, if one note. I wonder how she felt about this being pretty much her only character this week. The best part of the Untouchable sketch, if you ask me, is the fact that the players can all hear the narrator and are puzzled by it. It ends with Ness becoming annoyed by him and shooting him dead. The second fourth wall break in this episode, come to think of it. Gilda and Jane play Lucy and Ethel in basically every episode of I Love Lucy. It's all Lucy coming up with crazy schemes to get on stage with Ricky and Ethel naysaying. Again, not mind-blowing, but what else are they going to do with Desi as host? I enjoy the way this sketch is structured to lead directly into the Cuban Pete number, and like I said before, Lorraine is surprisingly good as a cabana girl in Desi's band. Take notes, Lily Tomlin, that's how you sing in a sketch on SNL. We end up with Lucy trying to fool Ricky dressed as what else? An end-of-scene cow. Nice touch, but he's not fooled. Desi plays an acupuncturist treating Belushi for migraine headaches. Here we go with the acupuncture thing again. It must have been some sort of new 70s fad sweeping the country because they joke about it like half a dozen times or more in the first season. Right off the bat, I want to point out that Desi, again, playing a doctor, is smoking when the sketch starts. These are different times, folks. Doctors just don't smoke anymore, period, and nobody really smokes on TV these days except villains and cool characters who die young. Admittedly, I don't watch much TV these days. I could be wrong about that. Belushi starts off the scene by telling Desi, "I thought you'd be Chinese," to which Arnaz replies, "No, I'm Cuban," without missing a beat. Belushi tells Arnaz about his migraines, and Belushi asks him about the pins he'll be using.
What do you mean you use cigars? I mean, usually they have pins when you go to a...
Well, that's like I told you. That's Chinese acupuncture. Now, if you want some Chinese gentleman to stick pins up your body, that's fine with me.
No, that's...
This is just glorious. We're treated to Desi Arnaz shoving cigars into John Belushi's ears and nostrils, and I love it. Belushi hardly ever plays the straight guy, but I think this counts even if he does have a panatella sticking out of his damn face. He does at least get to say,
The treatment. Yeah. Haven't got many openings left, you know.
which gets a good laugh. They close on Desi lamenting that the next patient is, regrettably, a vasectomy. This is probably the highlight of the episode for me, other than the musical numbers. Arnaz seems more at home here than in the complicated and long-winded Untouchables parody, and the length here is better suited to the gag. In which Chevy and Lorraine just can't communicate as a couple. The gag is that Chevy, in a very straight manner, complains at Lorraine about how they just don't understand each other, but most of the words he uses are gibberish.
I think the problem is your chromzoid attitude.
What?
Your chromzoid attitude. Your incredibly blonde snark chromzoid attitude.
Matt!
You are constantly into your own griebflards. It drives me nirkskill, and I can't take it.
This one is well acted and doesn't overstay itself. This episode needed more sketches like this, honestly. Jane presents a historical piece about one of America's first lesbian affairs for Bisexual Minute, another spoof of the Bicentennial Minute ad campaign. It's filler fluff based around the silly title and nothing more, and yet another example of Jane having the most boring job on the show almost every week until she inherited Update from Chevy. You guys, they made Desi frickin' Arnaz do a weed joke. I forgot to mention it when I discussed the monologue, but he says the cast gave him a box of cigars. He's never heard of the brand, you see, it's called Acapulco Gold, which is a strain of cannabis, but he hasn't smoked anything else since. It's adorable. The cast seemed to truly enjoy themselves this week, and the material was surprisingly solid. I hadn't expected to be impressed with this episode, but it turned out to have some unexpected highlights. Arnaz finished the show by leading the cast on a conga line through the audience, and it looked like a genuinely exuberant and joyous moment. It reminded me of the Bergen Christmas show in that regard. Gilda seemed to really enjoy being Lucy too, as much as I've kidded her about doing the same gag all night in this one. Next week would see film actress Jill Clayburgh as one of the more puzzling hosts of the first season, and it's not unpleasant, but is generally a step down in quality from what we saw here. Stay tuned.